Donald Trump's top military officials were testifying before the United States Senate Armed Services Committee, and these top military officials threw Donald Trump under the bus. They admitted that under the Trump regime, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist organizations are now thriving in Africa and across the world because of Donald Trump's weakness. These top military officials also admitted, essentially, that Donald Trump is too scared to engage in military operations in the Strait of Hormuz. And what they essentially said is that we have the military capabilities to take control of the Strait of Hormuz, but this is at a policy level decision making of what to do next that is beyond the purview of these military officials. These top military officials who testified under oath also admitted that President Zelensky of Ukraine has been perhaps the most instrumental force in helping democracies across the world build their militaries and not the United States. And the officials also talked about how the lack of funding, whether it's USAID and whether it's other critical programs, have really jeopardized soft power and strong power and America's ability to project power across the world. So you had Admiral Brad Cooper testifying, and he's the commander of CENTCOM, the head of CENTCOM. Then you had General Anderson testify. He's the head of AFRICOM, African Command. So let me show you what went down here. This is really astonishing stuff that you're probably not seeing anywhere else, which is why it's so important at the MeidasTouch Network to show you what's really going on, right? Because Donald Trump's out there saying, I got rid of Al-Qaeda, I got rid of ISIS, there's no more terrorist organizations. And meanwhile, what we see taking place in countries like Mali and frankly across the African continent and across the world is actually a resurgence of ISIS, Al-Qaeda linked groups, other terrorist cells on the rise because of Donald Trump's weakness. So here I want to show you both Senator King and Senator Wicker, who are cross-examining or asking questions to General Anderson, also to General Cooper, but mostly to General Anderson here. And I want you to see as they admit that ISIS, these terrorist organizations, are on the rise right now and actually pose imminent risk, imminent threat to the United States. So why isn't this being covered anywhere else other than the United States, other than here on the MeidasTouch Network about the threat to the United States? Here, let's play this clip.
You mentioned earlier that the Al-Qaeda and ISIS have resurged in Africa. And the term epicenter has been used several times of world terrorism. You use the term, you said they have the will and intent to attack the homeland. My question is, do they have the capacity? Are they developing weapons, strategies, other ways to take that will and intent and turn it into something of imminent danger to the American people?
Senator, that is the exact issue that is my top concern, is being able to provide, they have the assets necessary to provide the indication and warnings to know and be able to identify when they shift from that will intent to have the capacity and capability. That is something that is very difficult for us to ascertain in the Sahel right now, given our limited posture.
That was going to be my follow-up question, is do we have the capacity to determine their capacity? It sounds like you just said we don't have the capacity that we should have or need.
Senator, we are, that's why in the President's budget, we have asked for additional intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities, and why we're also looking at a layered approach to look at everything from surface to space, to look at commercial assets, to look at emerging technologies, open source as well, and use these technologies, especially artificial intelligence, in order to fuse these multiple different types of layered ISR in order to gain that understanding and illuminate this black hole of intelligence in the Sahel. We cannot sustainably afford to do that solely with airborne ISR, so we have to look at a multifaceted approach. There are some very promising emerging technologies that we are looking into and that are affordable and sustainable, and that also can work with our partners. Because one of the key points to this is not necessarily ours to action. So having that the intelligence that we can share with partners so they can then action those on a mutual threat is going to be key to our future. But being able to understand that is the number one priority of the command, and where we are looking at investing with emerging technology.
And I think, as you've testified, if they take over the capital of Mali, that's a very dangerous moment.
That would be a game changer, I believe, in how they would be viewed internationally and what traction they would be then, I think, to other adherents.
Thank you. Thank you.
How would that affect Americans, General?
Well, I think that would then give momentum to these terrorist organizations that have the will and intent, and it would allow them to then start moving towards the capability and capacities that Senator King just mentioned. And so that then, I think, poses a threat in the long term to the United States as they continue to develop this. We know that they have not given up this intent, and it's just a matter of having the time and space to develop them.
And it would be Vladimir Putin that would be happiest about this. Is that correct?
The prudent that what, sir?
That it would be President Vladimir Putin who would rejoice at such a contingency? Or would it be Xi Jinping?
I can't speak for what either one of those leaders would believe, but I think that they would be able to parlay that to their interest.
Well, who's financing this contingency if it were to happen?
Of the terrorists?
Yes.
They're gaining they're through lots of illicit materials. So it's not necessarily directly from a state actor. They're working with, as I mentioned earlier, the narco-terrorist trafficking. They're doing this through kidnap for ransom. They're doing this through other illegal smuggling. They even do have their own taxation networks in the territories that they control where they generate millions of dollars.
And before I turn to Senator Scott, with regard to the funds that we're not spending anymore on USAID, but have been supplemented elsewhere, in terms of dollars, let's talk in terms of U.S. dollar equivalents. How does the food aid, health aid, and development aid that we're currently delivering in your jurisdiction compare to what China and Russia are doing?
Senator, I don't have those exact numbers. I'd have to get back to you on those, as those are often in other departments, other agencies within the government, but we can look into that for you and look at what that comparison is between China and Russia.
Well, if you would, then supplement that on the record for us, because I don't know the answer either.
And then I'll show you more from the questioning by Senator King. Let's play this clip right here.
General Anderson, talk to me about the loss of soft power in Africa, our abandonment of USAID, and what's happened with the Chinese and the Russians that my understanding is are now filling that gap in addition to the other aggressive actions that they're taking.
Senator, I would say that we look at all facets of national power and how to bring those to bear on the continent in order to provide security outcomes. Oftentimes,
taken one facet of our national power off the table unilaterally for no apparent reason, the whim of Elon Musk.
Senator, we work very closely with state, with commerce and energy in order to look at the security requirements on the continent. I have a Foreign Service Commercial Officer joining my staff this summer, along with a liaison from Department of Energy, in order to look at economic opportunities. Is it not that we have essentially left all of the role that USAID played on the continent? That's gone. Isn't that's a yes or no question? Senator, there are still aid programs that are active on the continent. They are much reduced from what they were before. Much
reduced. That's a fair way of stating it.
And so next I want to show you some of the questioning from Senator Slotkin from Michigan. Here's her questioning to Cooper and Anderson. And she also points out that it's pretty clear that China is giving Iran all of these weapons while Donald Trump is out there being a Xi Jinping bootlicker. And you'll see, I mean, these military, the general, the admiral, they kind of admit that that's what's going on. throwing Trump under the bus. Here, let's play this clip.
Do you believe, is that correct, that while militarily we may be able to physically open the straits, that they still retain the ability to affect infrastructure in the region and therefore kind of have a veto power over the world economy right now?
Senator, from a military perspective, I would characterize Iran as having a remnant capability across multiple domains. In terms of veto power, I'd really would defer to policymakers for that characterization.
But sorry, can they strike oil infrastructure across the Persian Gulf?
They have a very moderate, if not small, capability to continue strikes. And we, of course, have accordingly prepared for such a contingency.
Okay, but if we have the power to militarily open the straits and their threat is, quote, moderate or small, why wouldn't we just do it?
So I really would defer to policymakers in this particular matter. And the strait clearly is in the middle of the negotiation being undertaken now.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to me that they still certainly have, it may be diminished power, but if the United States military is not physically opening the straits right now, it's because the Iranians do have the real capability to affect strikes or drone strikes into the Gulf countries, affecting their oil infrastructure and sending the price of oil worldwide even higher. So, it may be diminished, but it's real capability unless I'm missing something. Can you describe for me, I'm very sensitive about the way that countries like Russia or China may be enabling the Iranians to target and kill American forces or to provide intelligence on their locations in real or near real time. Is it fair to say that the Chinese are providing intelligence to the Iranians to help them target U.S. forces?
So I think best to talk about anything regarding intelligence in a classified manner. What I can say is the Iranian military is largely made up of Russian and Chinese equipment.
Okay. I think, it feels like either Chinese government and or Chinese companies are helping and aiding and abetting the Iranians in providing that information. I understand we don't want to go into the details, but some of this is like out in open press. I would just say I personally feel like that crosses a Rubicon. Anytime we have another country providing that kind of intelligence to an adversary, I think that should play very heavily in our calculus and our conversations. I know the president is with the Chinese government right now, but I hope that no matter what party we're from, that's just a Rubicon. We all believe once you cross it, we're in a very different conversation. And I hope that's playing out in Beijing. I yield back.
Next, I'll show you Senator Hirono. Here she talks about how we've been significantly harmed as a country because Trump pulled us out of the JCPOA, the Obama non-nuclear deal with Iran, which got us into this whole mess when Trump pulled us out of the JCPOA because he doesn't like Obama, and also lots of the problems that are now caused in the Strait of Hormuz because of Trump. Watch what Hirono has to say here. Let's play this clip.
Admiral Cooper, did the president ever explain to you why he tore up the JCPOA?
Senator, that's a policy matter that I would have expected anyone to discuss
He never
with me.
explained to you why he tore up the JCPOA. He either explained it to you or he
Senator,
didn't. I'm not asking you for the actual conversation, but did he happen to explain to you why he did something which led to the very nuclear crisis that we're now confronting regarding Iran and their enriched uranium?
Senator, I was in a completely different assignment when this occurred 8 years ago.
So apparently the president didn't have a discussion with anybody. In fact, it was a unilateral decision that he made. Now, you have vast experience, Admiral, and the Navy, et cetera. And before we attacked Iran, did it cross your mind that Iran may close the Strait of Hormuz?
Senator, as you know, one of my responsibilities as a combatant commander is to generate a wide range of options with associated risks and opportunities, present those to the Secretary and the President. I think it'd be inappropriate to talk about what those specifically
Well,
are.
I'm just asking
but
whether
we
with-
always make them very comprehensively.
Excuse me. I'm asking whether with your experience, the thought that should we attack Iran, that they would close the Strait of Hormuz, did that cross your mind?
Senator, I've transited
no?
through the Strait about 100 times. I think of the Strait of Hormuz virtually every day.
So is that a yes? That
think-
you
I think
are
it
very
has-
aware that the Strait of Hormuz, the very thing that happened, that is something that you contemplated happening. I hope that is the case, because with your experience, I have to conclude that you contemplated that possibility. So you did mention that our diplomats are engaged in the negotiations. Well, who are those diplomats?
Senator, I really would refer to the White House, who specifically is engaged.
Well, apparently the diplomats are Jared Kushner, who I don't think even works for our country, and Mr. Whitlock, Steve Whitlock, who happens to be I don't think he has a lot of experience engaging in these kinds of negotiations. So here we are. The JCPOA, which was a very intense, the results of very intense negotiations among many countries. And for us to act as though the idea of a nuclear Iran is just something that occurred to President Trump and not to his predecessors is pretty ridiculous. And in fact, we had in place a regime that was intended to do that very thing, which was to prevent a nuclear Iran. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
And this is where Senator Shaheen cross-examines these top military officials about Ukraine and Ukraine's support of the world through their military power. Here, play this clip.
One of the things that's gotten a fair amount of attention in recent weeks has been President Zelensky's working with some of our allies and partners in the Middle East in response to the war in Iran on the expertise that the Ukrainians have developed to address counter-drone responses. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing with respect to that, and whether our allies and partners find that kind of support helpful from the Ukrainians?
Senator, I think most significantly, we adopted a large number of tactics, techniques, and procedures that the Ukrainians have passed us that have helped us defend Americans. And all of our partners are working with Ukraine in some way, shape, or form. I'd really defer to them, let them talk about it. But are they more effective as a result? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Then Senator Blumenthal was questioning Admiral Cooper about the ability of the United States to open the Strait of Hormuz. And again, what Cooper seems to be saying is we can do it. It's just Trump's not doing it. Trump pulled out of Project Freedom, and Cooper's like, I don't really know why we did that, but I don't really have a say in that. Here, play this clip.
Regardless of what the numbers are, Iran continues to pose a significant threat to shipping because it has missiles and fast boats and other assets that are available to attack shipping in the area, correct?
Senator, all in each of those cases, their capability have been significantly degraded. If I just use my own professional experience, in 100 transits through the Strait of Hormuz, you would typically see 20 to 40 fast boats, and lately we've seen 2 or 3. So the degradation means it's been significant, but some residual capability does exist.
With respect to the threat that remains, your forces were successful in Project Freedom in enabling ships to go through the strait, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And Project Freedom was stopped for what reason?
Senator, I think I'll look back a couple of days ago on the chairman of the Joint Chiefs testimony before the Senate Appropriations Committee. I think he characterized it well. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz is rather complex these days, and I would offer just these quick points. First and foremost, the United States controls via our blockade, which I'd be happy to talk about, the overall flow of commerce going into and out of Iran. The Iranian capability to stop commerce has been dramatically degraded through the straits, but their voice is very loud. and those threats are clearly heard by the merchant industry and the insurance industry. Those are factors. There's certainly factors in energy.
But
and on top of all that,
I apologize for interrupting, but I'm going to run out of time, as you understand. I think the point that I want to make here is that Project Freedom could be started again, and the voices of the Iranians, large as they are, could be contradicted or reduced in impact if Project Freedom were ongoing and the world could see that shipping was going through the straits. Am I off base in that view?
Senator, there's a wide range of contingencies that we are prepared to execute. I would defer to the policymakers on anything having to do specifically with the Strait of Hormuz, particularly during this time of sensitive negotiations where it's front and center in the negotiations.
And have you seen any progress in those negotiations?
Senator, I'd refer to the diplomats and the team engaged in the negotiations.
Let me ask you, in the time that I have left, one of the objectives that President Trump articulated at the beginning of this war, which in my view could not be accomplished with bombing, was to secure the enriched uranium. Would you agree that taking possession of that uranium would require boots on the ground and significant casualties for United States forces?
Senator, in this particular forum, I think it would be highly inappropriate, given the classified nature of any contingencies, to talk about the nuclear program.
And next, I'll show you Senator Kelly, who had a lot of questions about the Trump regime gutting the entire team that focuses on working with the military to avoid civilian casualties. Now, I want you to pay very close attention to the answers here by Admiral Cooper, because I'm going to show you in a little bit what Senator Gillibrand asked. And Gillibrand was paying very close attention to Senator Kelly's questions right here. And Cooper talks about how there was this one incident that they've investigated. He doesn't mention it by name, but it's the Manab Elementary School, where the United States, the Trump regime, engaged in these horrific war crimes and killed over 160 elementary school girls. Horrible, which anybody involved in that, including the people sitting there, should be tried, including Cooper, should be tried in The Hague. I mean, he's a war criminal. You're in the chain of command. That's not legal. You sent a tomahawk and you killed 168 little girls. But watch what he responds here. And I hold this guy responsible too. You know, you're involved. There's no ignorance. Ignorance is not a defense. Play this clip.
So China and Russia continue to expand their influence across Africa. We discussed this with misinformation, disinformation across many African countries. You requested $94 million for information operation activities. You were promised, and this is in fiscal year 26, you were promised $25 million from the department. You ultimately received only $19 million. Can you talk about the difference between having $19 million to do that job and $94 million? Like, what are you able to do if you were fully funded? General Anderson, I get it. I mean, we see this stuff all the time. The amount of misinformation that comes from the Chinese and the Russians, it is a huge problem. But if you could just explain to us a little bit about what you could do if you had the full request.
Senator, I think the key point there is right now we are in a reactionary mode to propaganda and to other information operations, to what we can do at the moment. What the fuller funding would do, especially if it's consistent over time, would allow us to build an information campaign and address these issues across the continent. We're one of the few organizations that looks across the entirety of the continent and can understand how these propaganda and misinformations play across borders. We work very closely with the State Department and U.S. embassies on this to make sure our messaging is key, but this would allow us to do is help coordinate that messaging across regions and across the continent to highlight the issues that come with this misinformation, especially as much of it is destabilizing the democracies across the region.
Do you ever feel like we should be countering some of their disinformation with disinformation of our own?
Sir, I think the most powerful tool we have is the truth. What America brings is very unique. We're still a beacon of hope and light in the world. And I think we should be willing to talk about who we are. This is America's 250th anniversary. There's a long history on the continent that is, I mean, it's good and bad, but there's a lot of good that we can talk about of what America brings. The fact that John C. Robinson founded the Tuskegee Airmen, 2 years later founded the Ethiopian Air Force, and then went on to found Ethiopian Airlines, which is now the pride not only of Ethiopia, but Africa. It's not a story that's well known, but that is a tie that we have had between the aviation communities for years. There are multiple stories like that across the continent that we need to propagate and talk about. So I would say we should focus on the goodness and the positivity of engaging with America and worry less about the disinformation that our partners put out, but we have to engage in this environment. We have to be active in the information space.
So you got about 25% of the requests. So if you got the full amount, you could put more out there, positive stuff that the United States is doing. And I know these are, challenging times with resources, even beyond what DoD has, USAID and others. But do you think that would be sufficient to counter Chinese and Russian misinformation?
Senator, I think information operations is one of the lower cost investments that we can make that have outsized return and help amplify the limited resources we have in the military side and highlight the benefits that those provide. And being able to talk about that broadly, I do think has outside proportion. So small investments can have a large impact. And this is an area of information where I think we can make a lot of gains, even despite our smaller physical presence, that can highlight the totality of what the United States brings.
I 100% agree with you.
So now I'll bring you to this clip of Senator Gillibrand. And here you'll see Senator Gillibrand ask, I think this is pitch perfect cross-examination. I showed you this clip yesterday, but now I want you to see it in the full context when you see what the other senators were asking. And watch as Senator Gillibrand exposes that the United States military, that CENTCOM, especially, and all of the military, because of Trump and Hegseth, have not conducted any investigations. It's a stunning admission. Any investigations on any of the civilian casualties other than Manab. And so there are all these other incidents where the Trump regime used tomahawks to kill children, to kill people in hospitals, to kill lots of innocent people. And that hasn't been investigated. That's so anti-American. That's so horrific. Watch Senator Gillibrand's questioning. Let's play it.
Have you been implementing all the laws that are required under current law to minimize civilian death?
Senator, we have executed every operation consistent with the law of armed conflict. The subject of civilian casualties is a particular passion of mine. We pay attention to it. We follow all the procedures and have gone above and beyond to, in my case, personally warn the Iranian people of several instances during conflict where they were being potentially used as human targets. If they've been warned,
how did we then bomb 22 schools?
There's no indication that we have that has been corroborated.
How many schools have we bombed?
There is one active civilian casualty investigation from the 13,629 munitions.
So how do you explain the publicly available information that 22 schools have been hit and multiple hospitals?
There's no way that we can corroborate that. No indication of that whatsoever, Senator.
There's no way you can corroborate or no indication of it? Which one?
No indication.
Well, the indication is what's publicly available. There is indication. Have you investigated those claims?
We have not.
Why have you not? If this is a passion of yours, if you believe that the civilian casualties are not consistent with the law of war and not consistent with human rights obligations that our military regularly follows with great pride and great diligence, why have you not investigated those allegations when they're publicly being made on the cover of the New York Times?
I'll be happy to take a look at each instance.
I would like a report.
Will be able to do that.
I would like a report from you, from your team, about whether there have been attacks that have resulted in the destruction of schools and hospitals. And if so, why? And how then, last, have you managed the 90% cut to the personnel who are supposed to avoid civilian targets?
Happy to provide any report, and I would invite you and every staff member here to come to Tampa to look at the process to see exactly how it works.
Thank you. Thank you, Admiral.
There you have it, folks. And I think right now I want to bring in, why don't I bring in Senator Shaheen? Let's bring in Senator Shaheen senator from New Hampshire. You saw her questioning these generals and the admiral about Ukraine, Admiral Cooper. I want to, you know how passionate I am, right, about international affairs and the geopolitical environment, the security architecture. She's the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee. Let's bring her in. Senator Shaheen, it's great to see you. I know all eyes are on this summit that's taking place in China between Trump and Xi Jinping. But, I've been focused on what's going on in the rest of the world as well. I mean, there's a BRICS summit taking place in India where Foreign Minister Aragchi was invited, and there's some strong words kind of going on there. I saw this Bucharest 9 meeting that was taking place with a lot of countries that are allies with the United States that Trump has kind of been, pushing away. I've seen meetings there. I've seen Saudi Arabia talk about a 1970s style Helsinki non-aggression pact, with Iran. And I just don't see the U.S. in the conversation. I know Trump's very focused on this China meeting, and we'll talk about that. But it seems that there's a lot of structures that are now forming in the absence of U.S. leadership that not a lot of people are paying attention to, that are redefining the kind of global architecture of security, and America's kind of fading in the traditional role that we played. What do you see as the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee?
Well, you're right. And it's very troubling as we think about the traditional role that the United States has played in the world. We have been important to stability, to help resolving conflicts, to providing humanitarian assistance in so many places. And the Trump administration has turned all of that on its ear.
When we talk about, and I hear this term used a lot, security architecture, now, global kind of security architecture, where America would once provide the security umbrella in certain regions, right? The security umbrella in the Middle East, the security umbrella in Asia. I don't see it getting all that much attention, but it seems that a lot of what the subtext of this meeting with Xi Jinping, at least he went in with the idea of establishing kind of formally a new security architecture, or at least using the language that says that, while I heard the language of Trump more like, hey, man, you're so powerful, you're so great, you're so strong, you're such a good leader, there's Chinese food in the United States. So there were kind of two separate tracks going on as I observed it.
Well, I think you're right, and it speaks to President Trump's being willing to make decisions and deals based on flattery, based on what he thinks are relationships that he has with people, rather than what's in our security interests of the United States or the geopolitical interests of the world, for that matter. And as you point out, President Xi is coming into this meeting with a clear list of what China is looking for, and President Trump is coming in looking to look important and not focused on a list of what we want to see from the United States that's in the country's interests. Things like what is China going to be willing to give up in terms of stopping to steal our intellectual property. What is China going to be willing to do to better level the playing field for trade, and making it clear to China that we continue to support Taiwan. And the president has done none of that.
Yeah, as I try to explain it to my audience with the World Cup coming up, the team that scores more points is the winner, and the team that scores the less points doesn't go out there and say, hey, look, we won, when it's 5-0 and you're on the zero side. So I use that example when we talk about Iran. I said, well, what do we get? I mean, they controlled the Strait of Hormuz. Their regime is still in place. They still have their, to use Hegseth's term, the conventional shield around the uranium. So they've got like 3 or 4 points. And, we blew up a lot of things, and some things that were horrific as well. The elementary school in Manab that Donald Trump still doesn't want to acknowledge, took place in the war crime there, so I want to see who's putting points on the board. So I look at this negotiation and I'm thinking in Iran, I'm rather in China, and I'm thinking, okay, well, what are we getting out of this? What's China getting out of this? As you and I are doing this interview, at least what I've heard is that from the latest Bloomberg reporting, the U.S. is going to now offer the H200 chip to, 10 Chinese firms. And they claim all of the prior kind of GPU controls that were very important part of our policy, that those, I guess, weren't working. And now we're just going to give up the H200 so that, look, I saw the market today. The market likes, I guess, that NVIDIA and these companies are going to be doing business there. But ultimately, there's a balance, right? National security interests and all of these things also. So it looks like China got a big win there. And what are we getting, I guess? What is America getting out of this, to your point, other than Trump going there and feeling like he looks good, standing next to Xi Jinping?
Well, that's exactly right. And the fact that he's going to be willing to let China take those advanced chips is not good news for Americans, because it allows them to catch up to us. We've had a lead in terms of development of advanced chips. And what this does is give China the ability to close that gap in ways that have significant impact, not only on our economy, but also on their military capacity. And that should worry everybody. It's clear that it's important for the United States and China to maintain a relationship. We don't want to go to war with China, but in order to ensure that we have those deterrents, we have to be clear about our messages, number one, and about what we're going to stand up for. And we need to stand up for the intellectual property of American businesses. We need to stop the theft that China has been doing for decades now. We need to keep the innovation here in the United States that we have been so good at, and that China continues to rip off. And the fact that this Trump administration is cutting funding for research, the fact that they're sending away some of the best and brightest around the world, and China is picking up those threads, is not in America's interest. And yet President Trump is not raising any of those concerns. And he's mostly not also standing up on Taiwan. As I understand, the readout from the Chinese government about the meetings to date lean very heavily into Taiwan and their interest in gaining control of Taiwan, which produces 2/3 of the semiconductors that the world uses, a critical amount that we use in the United States that we really need. And we have had a position with respect to Taiwan for 40 years. We've provided them defensive weapons. We've worked in partnership with them. And the fact that President Trump has said nothing, that he has continued to put a hold on $14 billion in weapons that have been approved by Congress since January, should be of real concern.
I guess the question is, which is a bit rhetorical, is like, well, where do we go from here? But where do we go from here often presupposes that there's at least some plan or backup plans or some coherence. I heard, people referring to this as incoherent ambiguity as opposed to strategic ambiguity. And it's just unclear what's going on with the Strait of Hormuz. I don't know. We'll just, keep this blockade there and just see, whatever. We'll see what happens, and we'll just say we control it. Maybe we'll rebrand it, Senator. First we'll call it Epic Fury, then we'll call it Project Freedom, then we'll call it Sledgehammer, and then we'll just keep on recycling names of it. I guess, what are we doing? And a strange way to end the interview, but in all of this, what are we doing? And is the plan for Donald Trump, hey, manipulate the markets, keep the markets high, come up with a new press conference and a new name, and then pass it off. And maybe there's a Democratic president, who has to deal with it. And then when the Democratic president actually has to do the surgery and fix all of these things, And then we blame the fire department for putting out the fire. And then we get back into this cycle where it's their fault. Blame them. All your colleagues now become on the Republican side. They become fiscal hawks again and deficit hawks again and China hawks again. And then we get into this cycle. Then the Republican president comes back into power, does the same type of, and then we just keep on repeating this over and over. How do we break this cycle? Like, what do we do? How do we get out of this back to coherence and adult behavior?
Well, first of all, as you point out, President Trump and this administration doesn't have a coherent foreign policy. If they did, they wouldn't have gotten rid of foreign assistance. They wouldn't attack all of our allies and partners who are so critical, because part of America's strength is because we have such strong allies and partners, and we haven't seen that from our adversaries. And we should be concerned about the growing relationship between Russia and China, Iran and North Korea. And it's interesting to me that the subject of Russia hasn't come up at all, because we know Russia's providing targeting information to Iran in the Middle East that they are using to attack us and our allies and partners in the region. We have lifted the sanctions on Russian oil so that they're making billions of dollars a month that they're using to put into the war in Ukraine. And we know that President Xi is looking at what happens in Ukraine and whether we're going to stand up to Russia and continue to support the Ukrainians as he's making his calculations about Taiwan and other aggression in the South China Sea and in the Indo-Pacific region. So this is an administration in search of a foreign policy, and it shows in the way that President Trump has gone into this meeting in China in a weakened position because he has didn't listen to the experts on Iran, and the American people are paying the price. We're paying the price at the gas pump, paying the price in the grocery store, paying the price across the board in terms of the cost of living that Americans are seeing going up every week.
Senator Shaheen, we appreciate your leadership in the Senate, appreciate your leadership your entire career, in fact, and thanks for joining us for the interview.
Nice to be with you.
Everybody hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million subscribers.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.